Okay, you can start. I'll go for the
Radhe Radhe.
Radhe, Radhe. I'll lay you in the hands of Harika Didi. She's
Hare
running
Krishna
the order.
Prabhuji.
Okay.
Please welcome. Haribo.
Jai.
So before we start, I'd just like to say some prayers. So if we could all just close our eyes and fold our hands. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Desatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhascha kripa sindhuva eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hi Bol, and welcome everyone to the Writers Weekend Workshop. Today we will be hearing from His Grace Garuda Das Prabhuji, who is a professor of philosophy and religion, and he's also a lecturer of the Bhagavad Gita, and he teaches philosophy of yoga at the University of Newport in Virginia. He's also a Srila Prabhupada disciple who guides and counsels students on living life of heart with bhakti. So I will now give the platform to Garuda Prabhuji. If we can all welcome him with 3 Haribols. Haribol, Haribol, Haribol.
Haribol.
Thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity for me. So let me know how you'd like to proceed.
So
I can either speak and talk about my writing, or I can just answer questions or have a discussion. I'm completely open to however you'd like to see things happen.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for doing this for the School of Bhakti. So I guess what we can do is we can do a set of questions. I can keep asking you the questions, and then we can go on to an FAQs where people on the Zoom call can get to ask their personal questions to you, if that's okay.
Perfectly fine.
Okay, so as we know, you're a professor in America, and you're teaching, and every day you're meeting lots of new people. So how did you get inspired to write for Krishna?
Well, I think that first of all, you should know that I never liked writing. I never really did much writing at all before I became Prabhupada's disciple in 1972. It happened during the first Mayapur festival in 1974, where I went with a couple of hundred devotees. We all met in Mayapur when only the Chandrodaya Mandir, the 4-story building, that was the only thing standing. And it was barely standing because it wasn't even completed at the time. The building was still under construction. In fact, Ravindra Swarup and I, on the 4th floor, that was to be Prabhupada's quarters, we slept on a pile of cement dust with our sleeping bags. And my devotees back then, many devotees at that festival got sick because of the outdoor cooking kitchens that were arranged were not healthy. And I had heard from someone who was volunteered to be in the kitchen that first day that you cannot eat what they're cooking here. And I said, oh, come on, it's prasadam. They said, no, no, the little Bengali boys are squishing potatoes under their feet with worms crawling into it. I said, that's not prasadam. Okay. So I literally lived on bananas and dab juice, coconut dab juice. And I stayed very healthy. So every morning and every evening, Prabhupada would give class. And there were only about 25 of us there because everyone was sick. It was sad. Prabhupada was very disturbed and yelled at the person in charge. I won't mention names. But this gave me an incredible amount of access to Srila Prabhupada at the time, and his reading from his own books and his classes. And I went on many morning walks. And there was a certain point during Gaur Purnima day itself, where Prabhupada gave the lecture on that famous verse, Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Manda Mater Gati, Matsa Rasva Padam Bojo, Radha Madina Mohano, from the CC in the first chapter. And I got an overwhelming rush of energy to where I actually just wanted to fly back to the States and do nothing but read Prabhupada's books. Now remember, there weren't a lot of Prabhupada's books around. The CC was not even out at that point. The Bhagavatam was hardly what it became, and so on. But I knew my relationship for the rest of my life would be with Prabhupada's books. I didn't know what exactly that relationship would be, but I knew that it would be so. But of course, as it was, I didn't suddenly leave. I stayed, and we all went to Vrindavan, again, where we heard Prabhupada morning and evening, morning walks, and it was wonderful times, beautiful. But there was a special, that day, that Gaur Purnima was a special day. I knew I would have a relationship with Prabhupada's books for the rest of my life. I didn't know how. Then Prabhupada formed the Bhaktivedanta Institute in '75. I was part of that. Although I was not a scientist, I was part of the human sciences, as they say in Germany, Geisteswissenschaften, the spirit sciences, literally. So I was part of that, and it was clear that Prabhupada wanted certain devotees to be leading thinkers in all fields. What to speak of a field that was a field that would include expertise on the very life and philosophy that we lived. So I was the first devotee to apply to the university, which back then was unheard of. I mean, you just didn't do that. You know, it was virtually heretical and sinful to do that. But I'm skipping over a lot of details for the sake of brevity, but the short of it is that I got into the University of Chicago doctoral program where Professor Dimmock was. And Edward Dimmock, of course, wrote the foreword to the original Macmillan Bhagavad Gita. So I ended up studying with him and some of the greats in the field. And then the GBC in charge of me at the time, Rupanugala Prabhu, called me up one day and said, Garuda, you're the only devotee probably that's ever going to do this. So you know what? University of Chicago, people who know education know that Chicago is an amazingly powerful place, one of the top 10 universities in the country. But you're going to have to go to Harvard. I said, well, you can't just go to Harvard. I mean, you have to apply. You have to, you have to be a little qualified. You have to be a little smart to get into Harvard. He said, you're smart enough to get into Chicago. You'll be smart enough to get into Harvard. And by the way, you can't go to school with that shaved head and shika. And, I was going to graduate school here I didn't wear a dhoti, okay? I wore yogi pants, but I wore kurta, tilak, shaved head. My shika was very long, so I put it up in one of those little hangman nooses, and I was very attached to all that. And Rupanuga said, when you go to Harvard, so I got into Harvard, when you go to Harvard, you're not going to Harvard like that. No one will get a degree from Harvard looking like you. So I said, okay, well, and that was rough because that's the way we all dressed. So in any case, I ended up going to Harvard. Anyway, the short of it is that I ended up getting 3 master's degrees, one from University of Chicago, 2 from Harvard. One of those at Harvard was an accident, but that's another story. But I got a doctorate from Harvard in comparative religion. Now remember, I'm not someone who was naturally inclined toward writing as a child or a teenager, even as a young adult. But of course, being in graduate school all those years, I have a pile of papers that I've written for different courses that probably amount to 2,000 pages. And none of these have been published. I mean, this is 2,000 pages of graduate study before I ended up writing, where's that? Oh, it's just, this thick thing, which is my doctoral thesis at Harvard, called Dance of Divine Love. It's only 550 pages, which then expanded to close to 3,000 pages after I left Harvard, then ended up being published by Princeton University Press as Dance of Divine Love in this book. And of course, the editor at Princeton said, we're not going to publish your 3,000 pages. We'll publish 800 manuscript pages, which turns into 450 book pages. So writing has been nothing but a full-time, engagement in some sense with me for forever. Ever since I went back to the university. And I'll just end by saying that writing is, with what I do, writing is an extraordinarily painful and rewarding craft that may take, your generation is one in which writing, everyone writes, everyone publishes, everyone goes, right? So it's very different. But to get someone like Princeton University Press to publish your book, that's a different kind of writing, right? And right now I'm working on a book for Yale, which is the Yoga Sutra, seen through the eyes of Krishna Bhakti, which has never been done before. And my claim is that the Yoga Sutra actually is about nothing else but bhakti, but no one can see it because they don't have the bhakti vilochana, bhakti vilochana. So for example, the opening paragraph that a person will read when they start reading the book has to be perfect. Each word has to be perfectly placed, perfectly chosen. And all the words have to work together. Otherwise, you lose your reader. So now, not all writing has to be what I do. Okay, I'm a specialist. I'm an academic sort of freak. of a sort. I do command the attention of publishers like Oxford and Yale and Princeton and Columbia and others, and even the trade publisher of HarperCollins, where I did a translation of the Bhagavad Gita that bridges people over into Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, which many people find too daunting to approach initially. So they read this and then they say, oh my gosh, now I can appreciate what Prabhupada is saying, what he's doing. So that book functions that way. Anyway, now just to wind up here, Dance of Divine Love is 450 pages. It's going to now go to Oxford University Press in a abridged softcover version. But and this is meant for a much wider distribution. So I'm lucky to have a wife who is an extraordinarily talented writer, who knows how to write richly and beautifully and deeply without dumbing down for the masses. And she does so very, very successfully. And she is now going through my abridged version of the book and making sure that it speaks to people in general. So that's something we're working on now for Oxford. So Oxford, New York, not Oxford over there. Okay, Oxford, New York is considered even better. But in any case, so writing, just to end with this, writing for me is something that is incredibly arduous and very, it's a very painful, but the most rewarding task ever.
I completely agree. Writing can be an arduous task. I remember, like you said, when I was at Stanford, I would fear like wearing a sari and putting my tilak and going to school. So you sometimes have to, work according to the time, place, and circumstance. And this really brings me to like my next question, which is, what is your favorite part of being a writer? And how do you deal with the day-to-day? Most of us are juggling with work, service, family commitments. How do we find our sacred writing space where we can use it as a form of connection to Krishna from our heart, or as a form of prayer, and find that peace in writing?
Yes. Okay, I'm not someone who finds so much peace in writing because, as I mentioned to you, I'm like, tearing my hair out just to get things down, just right. But writing, Prabhupada does speak about how writing, everyone should write. And what Prabhupada is really talking about there is he's talking about writing as a part of sadhana. Writing is realization, Prabhupada says in several places. And he says, even if it's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, you write. And writing is a form of kirtan. So you're hearing, and then you're writing. But then you're hearing what you wrote when you read it. And then you will go either ah or oh. It's usually one or the other. Ah, wow. That, I don't know where that came from. That's great. Or like, where did that come from? Oh my God, that is awful. So it's a way to reflect on your own way of understanding and thinking. Writing for sadhana is writing for self-reflection, self-realization. It is not necessarily anything to be shared. So you are the only audience for sadhana writing. Okay? Now, if you have a particular audience for whom your writing is intended, then this is a question of how sensitive are you to your audience? What is it that they need from you? What do they need to hear? Your writing is a form of kirtan. So what do they need to hear? They're Shravaniya, they're Shravanis, right? So they're the ones hearing. You're a Kirtaniya, so you're giving them what it is that they need to hear. The question really becomes, how sensitive are you to your audience? Now, I'll give you an example of some good writing of mine and bad writing of mine, okay? In a published book, okay? How about that? Okay, I'm being vulnerable here. Now, Bhakti Charu Swami, our beloved godbrother, with whom I was very close, wrote the book called Ocean of Mercy, okay, published by the BBT only in the last few years. Well, he came to me and he said, I want you to help me write my book. And I said, I don't have the time, Swami, but I'll send you to someone who is a friend of mine, an English professor, devotee, who can do that. And he did, they worked together. But I gave him a few tips. And then he comes back to me and said, Garuda, I'm having Radhanath Swami write the foreword, but I want you to write the preface, which is the first thing they open up to. So little pressure, little pressure, right? Okay. So here's my good writing. The first two sentences are good. The third one, I won't say is bad writing. It just wasn't done carefully enough, okay? Undeniably, it is love that is the most powerful force in life. And it follows that at the core of all religion and genuine spirituality is some form of love, some cultivation of the heart. Okay, that's good writing. That's good. I mean, my gosh, wouldn't you want to read a book that starts like, okay, we're good, okay? Here's the bad writing. I mean, so-called bad, but the author of this work shares the early events of his life that led him to the life of a monk in the Krishna Bhakti tradition of the Chaitanya school of Vaishnavism. That part of the Hindu tradition which focuses on the love and worship of Vishnu, or more specifically, the loving devotion taught and exemplified by the medieval mystic and divine incarnation, Sri Chaitanya, 1486 to 1534, in his ultimate vision of the intimate divinities of Radha and Krishna. Way too long. That's called a run-on sentence. Bad boy, okay? Bad writing, okay? Okay, now the content, Jagadish, I want you to behave yourself on here, okay? I happen to know Jagadish, okay? Now, you see, the content was valuable, but it got lost in a sentence that goes from here to London. Okay, and I live near Washington, D.C., so you see how far that is. So don't take your reader on a 7-hour flight, for God's sake. I mean, anyway, so that should have been broken up into 3 sentences. You've lost the attention of your reader. Okay, so the first 2 sentences, super, good writing. Every word, it wasn't missing any words. It wasn't too heavy with words, just right balance, not too long, not too short. The third sentence should have been 3 sentences. So we have to be sensitive to what our readers are going to absorb, what they can absorb. Now, of course, I can blame my editor, the editor who, put Swami's book together, and say, Garuda, you sure you want that long, over-labored sentence in the, they should have done that, and I should have caught it, but no one caught it. Anyway, so if you're writing for a particular audience, it behooves us to become sensitive to their capacity of reception, of receptivity. What will turn them off? What will turn them on? not just in terms of writing mechanics, but in terms of content as well. So writing is an extraordinarily difficult task if you take it really, really seriously. Now, I'm a little spoiled, I'll tell you, Harika. My job is I go to the university a few hours of the week. That's my full-time job, right? And then when I go, what do I teach? Bhagavad Gita, all of you have heard of that book. Okay, Bhagavad Gita, philosophy of yoga. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, it's just like I go there and I teach. And so when I go, all my students know that I write and publish books. So sometimes I'll test something out on them. I even call them my guinea pigs. They're not insulted somehow, but I do call them my dearest guinea pigs. And like, what do you think about this? What goes on in your mind? And by the way, it's always good if you do serious writing that gets published for others in a particular audience. You have to have a second, third, and fourth set of eyes to give you feedback. I don't care how masterful a writer you are. You must get the feedback from others. So this is tricky stuff. Writing is a very, very delicate task if it's done well. Did I respond at all, Harika, to your, I even forgot what the question was.
Yes,
Anyway.
I love the way this is going.
Okay,
So
good.
I think it points very well into my next question, which is, you're an academic. You meet people from all across the world. They come from different backgrounds. So my question is I do experience this when sometimes I'm writing, for Krishna conscious, and then you're in School of Bhakti and we're doing preaching and we're teaching to people who don't come from this traditional, Krishna conscious background. But at the same time, what do you feel, has to be preserved in the books and in our writings? How do we keep that Prabhupada mood alive in our writing, as well as, accommodate the people who don't come from a Krishna conscious background? And, sometimes we have to avoid using the ISKCON jargon. So it would be nice to know what you have to think about that.
Yes. Yeah, there is the tendency to use ISKCON jargon. So for example, in Dance of Divine Love, when I had to explain how Krishna dances with each and every gopi in the Rasa Mandala, Prabhupada uses the term, he expands himself. That sounds to an outsider person like Krishna kind of blows himself up. Okay, but that's not what he does. So instead of saying Krishna expands himself, I say Krishna duplicates himself multiple times to attend each and every Vrajagopika. So you see, you may not be able, don't imitate Prabhupada. Prabhupada also uses the word symptom for something that's good, symptoms of ecstasy. But a symptom is a sign of sickness. Okay, so you can't use the word symptom the way Prabhupada uses it. Okay, don't imitate Prabhupada. Speak in your own language and speak it well. So, Harika, I had to, I work with the Avanti schools, Naveen Krishna, whom I'm sure you know, right? Right, okay. So I'm director of theology there. And so they were setting up their schools, and I've been associated with them for about 8 years. And so one day Naveen comes to me and says, Garuda, we need 3 prayers that all the kids will recite for 13 years of their education. In the morning, in the afternoon before prasad, and then the afternoon when they leave. We need 3 prayers. I'm thinking, wow, what do I want these children to remember pretty much for the rest of their lives, because they'll be reciting it for 13 years of education every morning, mid-afternoon, and late afternoon. Okay, so this is extraordinary. What do we want the takeaway to be? What do we want to have resounding in their hearts? So again, this is word crafting. Honestly, I'll have to tell you all that my writing begins not from inspiration, but from frustration. I'm frustrated that my audience is not hearing something that needs to be heard. So I'm a writer that begins with frustration, which then morphs into inspiration. And in that way, I'm taking care of a bit of a neurosis of mine, a kind of, frustration of some kind that devotees are not hearing this. Devotees are not hearing that. For example, even in one time, a well-known sannyasi wrote to me and said, "Why in the world would you translate the Bhagavad Gita? We already have Prabhupada's translation." And he said, "But I can." He said, "I understand it." Actually, he was a disciple of his. I'll just name him because it doesn't matter. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Okay, so Bhaktivedanta Swami, whom, by the way, embarrassingly, I never knew of 9, 10 years ago. He wrote me an email, said, "Dear Garuda Prabhu, places and so on. I gave a class on you, thought you'd like to hear it. You're a servant, Bhaktivedanta Swami." I said, "What?" He said, "First of all, who is this Bhaktivedanta Swami? Second of all, give a class on me? There's nothing to say about me." It's not, what does that mean? He gives a class on me. Basically, it was a disciple of his asking, saying, "Guru Maharaj, there is one godbrother of yours, Garuda Das, some big academic who did his own translation with a world-class publisher of the Bhagavad Gita. Isn't he a guru aparadi?" How do you like that for a nice leading question? Okay. And Bhaktivedanta Swami said, "Well, I don't know Garuda. I understand he's a leading academic devotee, blah, blah, blah. So perhaps if he's doing it for the academics and only for the academics, that this would be fine. This is part of his academic work." So I'm hearing this, and they're going back and forth about me when no one there knows anything about me. No one even has even seen the book, to speak of read the book, right? So he wrote to me, and I wrote back, and I said, "Well, thank you. I listened to the talk, and may I suggest that you read the book, and then perhaps we could talk about it. But it is not written just for academics. It is used all over the yoga world. 50,000 have been sold. And I mean, not by street distribution. They're in bookstores or online, and people order them. And I don't have anything to do with it." He read the book, and he loved it. He actually sent me a gift. He liked it so much. And what he got something from the book that I am frustrated that devotees don't get from Prabhupada's Gita. What devotees by and large get from Prabhupada's Gita is that we, in essence, we should perform devotional service to Krishna. This will purify us. This will allow us to go back to Godhead. This is essentially what I get from devotees who read Prabhupada's Gita. But there's much more in there. But what you get from my Gita is, by the way, a very academic free verse translation, which shows that ultimately what Prabhupada is doing sometimes in a more loose translation, prose translation, it adds up to the same thing. So I'm proving that what Prabhupada does is correct. So that's one thing I'm doing. But the message I get across that Prabhupada's Gita, that gets buried, I think, in Prabhupada's Gita, is the reason we perform devotional service to Krishna is because Krishna is calling us. Why do you think he's playing the flute? Even with Radha, he's playing the flute. And there would otherwise be no reason for him to play the flute if he's got his greatest beloved by him. Why would he play the flute? But they're both gazing out at each other, gazing out at us, playing the flute. They are both calling us to their love. This is what I bring out in this Gita. And that's something that gets buried. It's often too buried in Prabhupada's Gita that devotees don't pick up on. It's there, but they don't pick up on it. So I get frustrated that they don't pick up on it. So there's my frustration. And so I wrote it and I did it and it's out there, and and I've gotten enormous number of appreciations, even though many devotees are nervous that I'm doing this and it could be offensive to Prabhupada. It's not offensive to Prabhupada. By the way, here's another thing I get sometimes from devotees. Garuda, why are you writing at all? You shouldn't be writing at all. Because Prabhupada says, unless you are a Mahabhagavata or pure devotee, you should not be, no one should write transcendental literature unless they are completely pure. So the first thing I try is, I tell them that I'm completely pure. Okay, now that obviously doesn't work. Okay, so I back off from that and say that actually the complete purity that I rely on is not my own, but is Mahaprabhu's and Prabhupada's purity that is much stronger than my impurities and that can work through me in spite of me. And I've seen it. So, accept that or not. The third thing I tell them is that actually Prabhupada, when sitting with a bunch of devotees back in the day, as reported by Pradyumna, a reliable source, the Radha Vallabha asked Prabhupada, what are you going to translate, now that you've translated this, that, and the other? Prabhupada said, oh, there's so many. The Mahabharata, the Vedanta Sutra, the Ramayana, and the Bhagavad Gita. Devotees kind of looked around like, did we hear Prabhupada say Bhagavad Gita? And everyone was a little scared to ask Prabhupada, like, you do know, right, that you translated the Bhagavad Gita. So Radha Vallabha said, but Prabhupada, you already translated the Bhagavad Gita. He said, oh yes, but there can be many more. So there you go. So there's that. Okay. Then if I have to defend myself even further, Prabhupada received in Vrindavan, in his last months, he received my master's thesis that I did on the Chaitanya Charitamrita at the University of Chicago. And he told Satsrup, because he was on his back, but he was flipping through the pages of my dissertation and hearing my letter to Prabhupada, where I was on my way to Harvard and what I was doing. He also received a letter from Rupanuga Prabhu, who the very last letter that Rupanuga would ever write to him, out of 100 letters that he wrote and received back letters, the last paragraph of his last letter was all about me. And Prabhupada said to Satsrup, tell him that I am pleased he is preaching on such a high platform. So I tell devotees, look, if Prabhupada wanted me to stop writing, that would have been the time he would have done so. And anyone who knew Prabhupada knew that when Prabhupada was seeing something that was objectionable, oh my gosh, he would slam it right away. So he didn't. In fact, he appreciated it. So again, I use this again as a license for my writing, even though it's completely illicit and improper and impure and so on.
That's just amazing, because it leads to my next question, which is, most of us don't come from an academic background, and some of us are in humble circumstances where we're just beginning to write. So even after going through so many challenges, what keeps you motivated to write for devotees and Krishna? And I know as an academic, as a teacher, I've heard a lot of teachers are always learning from their students. So what is one thing that you can say that you've learned from, your students that can help us all?
Oh, yes. Well, I learned so much from my students, whether they be devotee students or academic students, or even Jagadish Hari here online. Even sometimes I learn something, a few things from him, which is, when you meet him, it seems unlikely, but it's a miracle. It's amazing. But seriously, you do learn so much from just speaking to others. Because remember, writing is, in some sense, a kind of distillation of your thinking and speaking. The way you write often reflects the way you think and the way you speak. So that kind of distillation, and this is why it's such a rude awakening to read what you've written, because you might go, you might just be shocked at how bad it is, or you might be shocked at how good it is. And so whether, yes, being in the academic setting gives me all kinds of advantages. Having a Harvard PhD has all kinds of advantages. But you know what? These are hardly the only arenas or spheres or kshetras in which to produce effective writing and to contribute so much to others. You have to know your audience. You've just got to know your audience. When you're reading along in the CC, you'll come across places where Prabhupada is telling you all about Buddhist philosophy. One sits back and says, wow, I mean, Buddha, how does Prabhupada know about Buddhist philosophy? Since, we of course expect him to be extraordinarily comprehensive with the whole Sampradaya's literature. Fine. But here he's talking about Buddhism. Whoa. Well, remember Shunyavadi, right? Paschatya Deshatarane, Nirvishesha, Shunyavadi. So Nirvishesha. So when you read about Shankaracharya's Shariraka Mimamsa Bhashya in the CC, he gives detailed understandings of what he's doing philosophically, because Prabhupada knows his audience. He wants us to know our audience when we're speaking to that kind of person who is influenced by Nirvishesha or Shunyavadi. The best way to know your audience is to listen to them. Inquire from them. Find out where their lack of understanding is. Get frustrated like I do. Just become a neurotic like I am. Get frustrated. Hey, do you know what I do when I have writer's block? I'm going to tell you all a secret, okay? This is, I really shouldn't say this, but anyway, when I've got writer's block and nothing's coming out, I'm reading this, I'm reading that, trying to get inspired, blah, 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 and so on, and I'm getting inspired, but the writing's not coming. You know what I do? I threaten myself. I say, okay, Garuda, this is your last chance before you get the big punishment. And the big punishment is to get in my car, to drive to a Barnes & Noble bookstore, and to look at the shelf on Hinduism. That's like sending me to a hell. Because the writing is so poor, it's so bad, it's lacking so many types of information. I've even known myself to drive halfway to the bookstore and say, okay, and then I drive back. Just the thought of ending up at the bookstore is enough to get me to write. Because to go and actually end up at the bookstore in front of that shelf on Hinduism is enough to absolutely torment me for days. So that's how I get myself to write, by looking at how bad, I'm sorry to say, but to look how badly things are written. And again, this is part of my frustration, right? Get frustrated. Find in yourself the things that you know that they don't know, that you know they should know, and that you can write about and let them know. Get frustrated. I know this is a weird, I'm sorry, Harika. I mean, this is not what you expected, but I'm telling you, this is one way. It's not the only way, but it's, the other way to do it is to get so inspired. Now, this is the opposite way. Start with inspiration. To get so inspired by your deep, deep probing of our tradition. And then realize that somehow you want some of these treasures to be offered to others who would otherwise not be able to have these treasures. So it's frustration. That's the frustration marga. And then there's the inspiration marga. Those are the two for me.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for the amazing 45 minutes of like pure nectar. I think now we can, ask the audience. If anyone wants to ask a personal question to Prabhuji, you can just unmute yourself and put your video on and go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, please. And feel free to ask me anything.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
Firstly, Garuda Prabhu, thank you so much for being just so honest and transparent and open-hearted. I think sometimes in ISKCON, we're so fearful of not, we want to be chaste to Srila Prabhupada's teachings, but at the same time, ISKCON is a dynamic movement. So I think, you exemplify that. So thank you so much for that.
Oh.
And thank you for sharing your insights about going to the bookshops and seeing some of the poor literature there. So I think,
yeah. No one should remind me of that. Okay, again on the call.
Well, that was very compelling. Reminder.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is that my Guru Maharaj, His Holiness Lokanath Swami, gave me your book when he was traveling to London. He happened to be carrying it with him. And unbeknown to me, we were just talking about maybe writing something on the Bhagavad Gita. And he whipped out your book and said, here you are. So you're my inspiration. Thank you for your book. My question to you is, having an academic background in Oxford with a scholarship on the Bhagavad Gita, it was very much about themes rather than going systematically through all the verses. And I suppose the question I wanted to ask you was, I'm at a pivotal point in terms of writing this book, which doesn't use jargon, because I was pulled up in Oxford about that, because then I wouldn't be, reaching out. And I think it's really hard because the jargon's really, we use it in our everyday life and everything. So my question's a personal one, really, which is, may I keep in touch with you and maybe send you the draft of my thing, so I can just at least have, because I think for me, you're my role model. You're an academic and you're out there and you are preaching in a way that people can access Srila Prabhupada's books. And I think one of the things you said was, well, Srila Prabhupada says to read his books scrutinizingly. And so I suppose that's where our own, would you say our own understanding and inspiration comes from, because we all have our traumas and beliefs and our cultural background and all of that, but there's something about when we read Srila Prabhupada's book scrutinizingly, that whatever that comes up, it's for us to be able to share with others. Would you say open-heartedly? Or
so your question is,
Two questions I asked you. Can I keep in touch with you about sending
okay,
my
okay,
book? Yeah.
okay. Well, let me answer that one quickly. You know, professors are known to be, we have a reputation for being absent-minded. And we have and we have a reputation for being rather nutty, which and I'm afraid there's a lot of truth to both. So I certainly welcome you to do so, but I tend to be very overloaded, and I have. You're not going to believe this, but I'm working on about 5 books right now. The world's first Bhagavad Gita comprehensive concordance reference work should be published by Columbia or Oxford. I already have a contract with Columbia. Yale is, I'm already 2 years late for the Yale book. Columbia, I won't even tell you how many years I'm late with that book. So I'm a little overwhelmed with projects, but give it a try. Yes, I mean, I certainly welcome you to contact me, but I can't guarantee what exactly will be my ability to respond responsibly.
Sure.
Okay, but it would be lovely. Sometimes also I make it over to England. You're in England, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes of course, I usually am at the Avanti headquarters, which is near the manor. And I usually give class at the manor, usually once while I'm there. I give them a heads up, quite a warning, so some of my god brothers and god sisters can leave town in time for when I'm there. Vishaka, of course, the temple president, she's very dear, practically family friend of mine, along with her husband, Yadubara. So she'll definitely want time to get out of town. But sometimes I stay at the manor for a whole day, just hanging out with devotees. And I look at things like writing and different things that people have. So that would also be another opportunity. If COVID, you know, ever takes a back seat in this world. But so that's the first response. Okay. The second one was something about being open-hearted.
Yeah, I think the danger is we're told not to entertain too much sahaja mentality, but at the same time, there's a sense of, sharing not too confidential aspects, but being open-hearted so other people can feel inspired to read Srila Prabhupada's books, move on. And so my question to you is, you are a rare role model in ISKCON. How does one write without fear or favor, knowing that there's something in you driving you to write? Okay,
I have some, what I think are very important guidelines. First of all, the first will sound like a truism. Only write what you truly know. When Prabhupada says writing is realization, he's assuming that we're writing honestly.
Yeah.
So we have to write what we truly know. But then we also, adding to that, is stay away from the verb to be. Just stay away from it. It's that verb is only for God. When someone tells me that they said, when this guest came to the temple, I told him that Prabhupada is a pure devotee. And then, he challenged me, how do you know he's a pure devotee? And I said, well, what did you say? Because, the fact is, if you can declare that Prabhupada is a pure devotee, what does that make you? See, you can't honestly say that. That's not an honest statement. But you see, people, when you write, you have to make sure that our words are grounded in reality and honesty. And to the extent that they are, the words have power. So what is the difference between saying Prabhupada is a pure devotee and the statement, I have felt such power from Prabhupada's teachings that I have devoted my life to his teachings? Now, no one can dispute that. That is an absolute, if you say Prabhupada is a pure devotee, or you say, I love Prabhupada, the first statement can be disputed, it can be argued, it can be, I mean, wow, you could go back and forth forever on that one. I love Prabhupada. There is no dispute possible with that statement. It is an absolute statement. No one can tell you who you should love, what you're attracted to, what you're not attracted to, because it's about you, and only you can truly know about you. Be yourself, but be yourself truly and honestly. Prabhupada says this movement is based on love and trust. Well, you know what? Express in your writing what you truly love in a way that can be truly trusted. You know, it's powerful. So you know, I open up the Yoga Sutra introduction. This is the first words that they're going to read. The Yoga Sutra is one of the very first treatises on the psychology of the human condition in the history of humankind. Oh my gosh, that's an OMG statement, right? Like, whoa, whoa, okay.
Dropping mics, Garuda Prabhu, dropping mics.
Indeed, that's the whole point, right? It is also the original and most thoroughgoing manual on the intricacies of the various stages of personal yoga practice, a practice that leads to the perfectional levels of yoga in which one is fully absorbed in a state of union and supreme joy. You've got to grab them. Now, I make these statements, ladies and gentlemen, I make these statements because I know this stuff. Okay? Now, I know it as an authority, blah, 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 whatever. But the first things that you do know are things that you know about yourself and the things that you know from Prabhupada's books. So make sure that you state things that you absolutely know. If you don't quite know it, don't say it. As soon as you start working with statements that are a little shaky on what you realized, what your realizations are, what you truly know, you have now weakened the potency of your writing. Although it was laid down in words well over 2,000 years ago, its didactic, pithy aphorisms and eloquently expressed visions are still the most valuable for the serious practitioner of yoga today.
Could you just repeat that again, please?
Although it was laid down in words well over 2,000 years ago,
Yeah.
its didactic, pithy aphorisms and eloquently expressed visions are still the most valuable for the serious practitioner of yoga today. Okay, so that's my first paragraph. Now, if what is in here is not interesting to the reader, they actually shouldn't read the book. They really shouldn't. In fact, the subtext is, hey, dear reader, if you're not interested in anything I've said here, you should put the book back on the shelf, let someone else buy it. Really. In other words, I'll put it even more rudely. Dear reader, go away. Get away from me, right? Okay, so, you know, you're either in the groove and you've provided that groove for the reader. And then, of course, and then it becomes even more seductive as you read along. It explains the nature of a sutra, that it's like a necklace of stringing of pearls of wisdom that are given by the author, Patanjali. And then it goes on and talks about how ultimately yoga is union on many levels with ultimately the union of love between the soul and the supreme soul. And goes on, and it's meant to be seductive, to draw in the reader. Make sure your reader cannot stop reading what you're writing. And at some point, now, I'll tell you honestly, I have written and rewritten introductory paragraphs, sometimes as many as 20 different versions. You know, one thing I find with my students in the university, they write a paper and they think that it's like a revelation from the divine. I mean, they think that the first words that come out of their lotus mouths is pure Shabda Brahman, you know? They think that it is, you know, at least at the level of the quality of Jefferson's writing of the Constitution of the United States. You know, I mean, okay, so I have a kind of an animal farm. I tell them, look, the first thing you're going to write is what's called a doggy draft, okay? Doggy means rough, rough, okay? Rough, rough. The second draft you're going to write is something like a cow draft, okay? I'm sorry, but I do have to infantilize my students because otherwise they don't get it. Smooth, okay? Okay. And then the final draft that you're going to give me for your grade is a cat draft. Perfect. Okay? What you don't want to give me is a sheep draft. Bad, okay? And what you don't want, and you may start also with a puppy draft, which is a partial doggy draft, right? You've seen puppies, right? They're like partial dogs, okay? And then I talk about the eagle and the monkey problem, okay? The eagle sees the whole forest from way up above, but the details are not given enough attention. And then the monkeys, you know, swing from tree to tree eating bananas, but they have no idea what's going on in the rest of the forest. So there's the monkey-eagle problem, okay? Then there's the jackass, which is writer's block. Just stubborn, just won't move, you just can't get it to move, and that's writer's block, okay? So the jackass, or donkey, you know. So I have all these animals. I've got more, but you don't want to hear anymore. Anyway, the point is that, you know, I let them know that writing is a process. It's not an end. It's a means. In fact, you know what? It's so much a process that when I was writing this book, Dance of Divine Love, the editor, after a year and a half over the deadline, Brigitte van Reinberg, the editor, executive editor at the time, she said, Graham, do we have a manuscript? I said, well, Brigitte, I mean, it's almost there. I'm getting it, you know. And she said, Graham, let me tell you something. There are no finished books. They're just the ones that get published and the ones that don't. So, you know, this is sort of like her translation of that famous expression, perfection is the enemy of the good. If you're too much of a perfectionist, you'll never publish anything. Now, this is part of why I'm late publishing so many different books. I have publishers knocking my doors down. They even want books from me. Yale wants another book from me, and I haven't even submitted my first book. So I have the problem of too much success. I've got too much going on. And that's also a very difficult situation to deal with, just like the opposite problem. Like, no one wants to hear me. No one wants to publish me, you know. Well, in one sense, it's like the flip side of the coin. Both are stifling. So there's that median position where you write and you do put the time in. You do get other sets of eyes looking at it, critiquing it, and so on, which is, by the way, built into the rigorous academic publishing world. Whether you like it or not, your book is reviewed before it's published, ad nauseum, by the way. But the idea is that you want to do something that is at least acceptable to you. And after 15 years, this has been in print, I can read through this and I would say that most of everything I've done here, I still like, which is amazing because I've evolved also in so many ways. But I don't let things go unless I can feel really comfortable with it and I feel like I can teach from it fully. So I have my own criteria that allows me to submit a work and prevents me from doing so as well. The main thing, though, is for you to be sure that you are writing what you love and what you're inspired to write and what you're frustrated that you know needs to be written, that can be trusted, that is true to you, true to the Sampradaya, true to what is sensitive, to the way you're sensitive about your audience.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hi.
Can I ask one question?
Oh, please, yeah. I mean, go right on ahead.
First of all, my extreme gratitude, Prabhuji, for having this session. I have 3 quick questions, Prabhuji. One is, is your book on Gita available in India?
Oh, my book?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Well, HarperCollins is around the world. It's a worldwide publisher, so it could be. You can also get an ebook version. By the way, the ebook version is not as good because some of the diacrit characters are garbled, some of the formatting is messed up, and the formatting is very important to me. You know, it's let's see, there we go. You can see how the words are on the page. By the way, I am so sensitive to the way type looks on a page that HarperCollins, it's unheard of. I was the most difficult author they've ever had because I made them, normally you're supposed to only look at the proofs and just adjust the proofs when you get them. I made them go through 8 different sets of proofs. The production editor was so frustrated with me. Of course, I was frustrated with her, but I gave them in a PDF example of the way I want the book page to look. She just never could accomplish it. So she put me directly in touch with the typesetter or whatever the formatter, the computer person, and I had to work with him directly. And that's why the book looks so beautiful on the inside, because they were going to mess it up, but it looks beautiful. It's a very beautifully set book, as you can see there.
Thank you.
But
the second question is quite a basic one, and I'm a little embarrassed also to ask. But my major struck point
I've already embarrassed myself 12 times. Okay, you can do it once.
My major struck point stays at deciding who is my audience. Just like I have some inspiration and I want to write or express myself, but many a times I get stuck on deciding whom am I writing for.
Okay.
So
yeah, I mean, it's pretty important to know, at least to a good extent, for whom you are writing your piece, because it's just like dialogue. You know, when you're sitting in front of someone, you need to find out who's sitting there, right? So if you are, for example, maybe you go online and you find a blog stream of comments on Bhagavad Gita, and all these misconceptions. Bhagavad Gita, the whole Bhagavad Gita is about, you know, renouncing the fruits of your actions. That's what the whole Gita is about. What? You say? What? No. That's part of it. But you can't even understand that unless you've understood so many other things in the Gita. So there's your frustration, right? So I say you go out there and get frustrated by people. And boy, that's easy. I mean, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with myself. So I mean, you know, you there's plenty of people you can get frustrated with. And so that's one way to do it. Misconceptions, a sense of how people misunderstand Krishna bhakti. You know, the very practice to which you've been devoted to for so many years. Krishna is a flirt. He flirts with women. You know, they worship a god who flirts with women. Well, maybe you need to take care of that misconception. You know, there are all kinds of misconceptions that people have about Krishna bhakti. Christians have their own share. But Joseph seems to be left out of the whole thing. I mean, is he dad? Is he not dad? They got a problem there. Immaculate conception. Why are they so hung up about immaculate conception? And then God doesn't seem to be terribly sensitive to Mary, whether she wants to have a child or not. She just does. That sounds like God is not very sensitive to Mary. I mean, they got their own problems, We've got ours. We have things that we need to explain, right? So that's certainly one area. Read about atheists, why they're atheists. What about Richard Dawkins? The retired Oxford professor who goes around preaching atheism and preaching faith in science. What about that guy? The irony is he's an authority on evolutionary biology, but he doesn't know a thing about religion. And he's going around debunking religion. He's going around denouncing religion. I show little clips of his in my classes, and then I go off into a tirade about how this guy, who's an Oxford authority in evolutionary biology, doesn't know a thing about religion. What if I put Graham Schweig, he says the God delusion, I could put the science delusion. I can start now talking about how science is ruining the world. How much do I know about science? Not that much. I actually know more about science than he knows about religion. That's the funny thing. So anyway, the point is that here's an example of a very advanced scientist embarrassing himself, talking about things of which he knows nothing. Wow, it can happen with an Oxford, emeritus professor. We should never make that mistake. Always talk about things you know. That could begin with you, because frankly, no one knows you unless you reveal that to someone. To say Krishna is God, well, wait a second. I mean, Who are you to make? See, again, stay away from the verb to be. Who are you to make that statement? I mean, who are you? Some kind of, angel? I mean, what? Do you hang out with God all the time? I mean, how do you know this? So, you really have to talk about, you have to qualify your statements according to, ancient, sacred Indian Sanskrit texts. Krishna has been extolled as the special divinity who calls all of us to his heart with the sound of his flute. Okay, well, that sounds really nice. Okay, a lot nicer than Krishna is God. Oh, well, I mean, come on. Another thing devotees will do, Vaishnavism is a monotheistic religion, just like Christianity and Judaism. Whoa, wait a second. Are you really able to make that statement? First of all, do you know what monotheism is? Don't say things that you can't really know, okay? Now, I'm a theologian, I'm a trained theologian. I have said that we are actually not a monotheistic tradition. We are a theistic tradition, but that's much broader. It's a broader category. Excuse me. But then I did define in a book, oh, whatever, I'm not gonna, anyway, it's somewhere behind me, but that, and devotees have picked up on this and they love it. I have defined our tradition in this kind of theological language with this bulky phrase. We are a polymorphic bi-monotheistic tradition. Polymorphic, meaning the many forms, right? Bi-monotheism of the one deity that is Radha and Krishna dual. From them come the many forms of divinity, and then you can, work from there to the ultimate divinity, the penultimate divinity, and the quasi-ultimate divinities, what Prabhupada calls demigods. But I've defined it as the ultimate divinity, which is Radha and Krishna. The penultimate divinity might be Shiva, for example, and quasi-ultimate divinities like Indra and Agni, et cetera, right?
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
Right?
Sorry.
So make sure you really talk about what there's a need to talk about.
Sorry. Yeah, someone.
Yeah,
sorry,
last question. Yeah.
I already asked to maybe someone else.
Well, we'll leave it up to Harika to settle this fight here. We're having a fight.
I think we can take someone else, Prabhuji, if that's okay. I think
that's fine. It's up to you. Up to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhuji. I just had a question. A lot of what you said, I can totally relate to, because just reflecting what you said, the reason why I write is frustration as well, especially when I come across misconceptions, especially impersonalism and voidism, etc. So that's really kind of reassuring to come across someone who kind of like thinks in a very similar way. I tend to think about, what are the big issues out there? What are the common most misconceptions, especially about the Gaudiya Vaishnav, theology. The question I had for yourself was, when you know your audience, and when you know who your audience is and the problem that you're trying to address, what is the preparatory work that you personally actually do? What runs through your mind? What's the process that you personally follow when you're about to write a new book, for example, for a given audience? If you're able to just share your personal secrets, please.
Yes. Okay. Secret number one: imagine the questions that they will ask you. Sincere ones, challenging ones, maybe even how do you say? I don't want to say hateful questions, but disparaging questions. Okay? Imagine the questions that they will challenge you with. And make sure that somewhere in your writing, you respond to those challenges. Sometimes you can even state, now some of my readers may ask, blah, 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 blah. You could even be blatant that way, but not most of the time, not. Most of the time, what you're doing is you're tuning into what it is that they need to hear from you. Again, good writing is really about tuning into not only what they need to hear from you, but how they need to hear it. Form and substance. How do they need to hear it? Not just what they need to hear. You know, I was working with the foremost scholar in the world, in the Western world anyway, on Vedanta. Hans van Buitenen. He was a Dutch scholar, brilliant guy. So we were studying Purva Mimamsa and, you know, ancient Indian hermeneutics and all this kind of stuff. And they said, now you're ready to go to Vedanta. So now you've got the tools to understand Vedanta and the Vedanta Sutra Bhashyas. So now we'll first start with the Shariraka Mimamsa Bhashya of Shankaracharya. My eyes got big. I remember reading in the CC that even Mahabhagavats fall down when reading the Shariraka Mimamsa Bhashya. So I said, Professor Van Buitenen, why don't we just skip that one and go right to the Sri Bhashya of Ramanujacharya? He said, no. He said, you won't be able to appreciate what he's writing unless you understand what Shankara wrote. I said, I already know so much about, you know, of course, you never tell any professor you know so much. So I said, well, I'm kind of acquainted with, you know, I'm a little bit, you know, acquainted with what he said, there's no way around this, Mr. Schweig, Mr. at the time, of course. And of course, I get back to my apartment and I madly start calling, you know, Satsvarup Maharaj and Rupanuga Prabhu and call all these people. I said, what do I do? What do I do? I can't read this. I want to stay a devotee. This is, you know, and Rupanuga finally said, Garuda, you know what? You got to read it. Okay. And if I were you, I'd pray like hell before you do. That's what he said. That was his only, that's the best advice I got. Pray like hell. Okay. Well, you know what? I am, in retrospect, I am so glad I read Shankara, not because of the content of what he wrote. I found out his writing in, remember, I'm reading in Sanskrit here, right? So I found out that his Sanskrit was so beautiful. You know, you could write about squirrels, you know, eating nuts, you know. You know, there is a squirrel eating a nut right here. See that? Okay. And your audience may not have any interest in squirrels eating nuts. By the way, that's the cousin Shravi of my assistant, Professor Nutty, who notice he's got a mask on. He's very paranoid about COVID. But anyway, the point is that because inside the house here, there should be no problem really, but he insists on wearing, anyway, Professor Nutty helps me with my classes at the university. My students are very appreciative. I actually think they like Professor Nutty more than me, which is confounding to me because I have so much more personality than Professor Nutty. But the point is this, that you could write about crazy stuff, but if it's so eloquent, if it's so beautiful, people will read it. So you know what? You could be writing about the most profound aspects of Krishna Bhakti theology, but if your writing is really cruddy and it's just not good writing, who will read it? What I realized is that Shankara became so powerful because not merely what he wrote, but the way he wrote it. This is the essence. And remember, you folks who are writing now, People don't like to read. Isn't that funny? You're trying to figure out how to write and people don't even like to read. Come on. What do we have here? A bunch of losers? Are we just a bunch of losers just talking about writing here? What the heck have we been spending all of our time doing? People don't even like to read. That means that you have to have writing that is even just so enticing. There's no way around it. So the craft of writing is at least as important about what you're writing, even if maybe the craft is more important. So you talk about cousin Shravi, that's not my cousin, it's cousin to Professor Nutty. Prabhupada gave me the name of a bird, not the name of a squirrel, okay? I'm just trying to have you all remember that. The point is that you could be writing the, later tales of Winnie the Pooh. If the writing is powerful, you will be read. That's what Shankara taught me. So the questions, but figure out how to make the way you're writing deliver what you're writing powerfully. I hate to compare it to sugar-coated medicine, but it's kind of like that. It's sweet, like when my throat gets dry, I have these, Ricola, right? Okay. So, it's sweet, but it's got all kinds of herbs in there you wouldn't want to taste by themselves, right? So you got to do the sweetness of the writing. The words have to be sweet. They have to be incredibly enticing, and the content delivered. I hope that gives you something to work with there.
That's very useful, Prabhu. That's very interesting what you said about Adi Shankaracharya. I kind of glanced at it once and I thought I don't want to go anywhere near there. So
I don't recommend. I'm not recommend. Yeah.
No, so I stuck to Baldev Vidyabhushan instead. But thank you, Prabhu. That's a really wonderful answer. Very inspiring.
Great.
Really appreciate that.
Good.
So thank you, Prabhuji, for an amazing session today. I mean, I feel like I'm back in college, taking a class, and it's amazing.
Is it really that bad? Is it that bad?
No, I think we all had fun.
Liked college. Oh, okay.
I liked college.
Okay. I didn't know because I didn't have that kind of experience,
I was actually in college in the US as well, so.
Well, you were at Stanford.
Yeah. Yes, so I felt like I'm back there. So thank you for giving us this experience. If anyone has one last question, they can go ahead and ask. And then I think after that, we're going to have to wrap up.
Okay.
Would anyone want to ask a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
I want to ask that how do you identify that you have the authority to write anything about Krishna? And can we use our imaginations in writing also?
Okay, good. So two points, right? The word authority is interesting because it contains the word author. And if you're an author, you are the authority. Now, you're only an authority insofar as you are writing truly in the way we've been talking, right? Okay. So you're not an authority. For example, if I set up a website and I say, look, all of you should visit my website. It's called Schweig's Rocket Science. All of you are going to look at me like, okay. One of you should confront me and say, Garuda, your doctorate from Harvard is comparative religion with a focus on Krishna Bhakti. Okay, someone may need to remind me of that, but I'm not authoritative in that area. Okay, so I should write on truly what I know. So that makes me an author who is an authority. Now there's also the matter of being authorized. So there's authorization, there's author, and authority. Okay. When we read the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswamin, he was authorized by the devotees and by the deity. So there is where he's writing something for the whole community of devotees. That was his audience. Just like when the Avanti schools asked me to write these 3 prayers for thousands of students. Who knows how long these prayers will be used? I mean, they'll just be used a long time. The reason why they wanted me to write the one for Prasadam is because, first of all, this had to speak widely to Hindus as well as deeply to the Chaitanya tradition, both at the same time. Secondly, Bhakti Vinod's prayer that we all chant in the temples and homes, most people don't like to hear about the senses are a network of paths leading to death before you eat. Many people lose their appetite, okay? So, again, being sensitive to the audience. So the idea here is authorization. So authorization takes place within spheres. Your authorization might simply be that you have a desire to write. That could be coming from within your heart, and some marvelous things may come of it, and people may benefit. And as long as you write in a way that's true to you, true to the philosophy, true to even what outsiders would be able to accept, then this is powerful. Does this help so far? Rashi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So in other words, the idea is that you don't want to, and also, you know what also helps? Is when someone sees your writing and critiques it. And even, may just critique the heck out of it. I mean, may just mark it up in all kinds of ways. If you can take that and go back to the drawing board and understand, okay, that was my doggy draft, right? Remember what a doggy draft is, right? Rough, okay. And understand, I got to move this thing up to a cow draft. The very fact that you're willing to do that, undergo that rigor of critique, is in some sense a kind of self-authorization. Because if you're willing to go through that critique of an editor or a friend or someone who's very knowledgeable, can critique what you've written, then this shows yourself and it shows Krishna in your heart that this is something you really desire to do. And you really want, and if you have this desire to speak to certain people, to a certain audience, for example, who even authorized you to ask me that question? No one did. I mean, maybe Harika supplies this arena in which you can ask a question, but so who authorizes us even to talk to someone at a Sunday feast, talk, right? It's about taking your audience seriously. I remember back in the old days, back in the old days of ISKCON, it was crazy. I mean, you sat down with us at the Sunday feast and you had no idea who you were going to sit next to, right? I mean, you say, hi, my name is Garuda. Have you been here before? And he said, no, it's my first time. I said, oh, great. I said, so my name is Garuda Das. What is your name? He said, I'm God. I said, I'm sorry. I said, what is your name again? He said, I'm God. So I decided to take him seriously. I said, well, I've been looking for you all my life. I'm glad to finally meet you. And I said, well, so you're the you're Krishna in the Gita? I mean, you're the father of Jesus? You're God. He said, yes. So I pursued this. We had a wonderful conversation. Eventually, in the end, he realized that he wasn't the God. He might be a God. So I gave him that much, okay? So the point is, to whom are we speaking? Can we take them seriously even when they're not being serious, or even maybe they're serious in a kind of delusional way, can we enter into a conversation? Who authorizes us to enter into that conversation? Krishna does. Because we are his parts and parcels, right? That's a favorite expression of Prabhupada, right? We are a portion of Krishna. We are part of Krishna. And we're here to connect with other portions of Krishna. And that way we know Krishna more. There's Krishna in his heart. Even though he said he's God, he was mistakenly identified with Krishna in his heart. But he certainly was part of God. So it's my job to dialogue with him, to understand him. And as long as our writing is willing to be exercised in this way, and you're willing to undergo the rigor of the craft of writing, what to speak of the content that has to be sensitive to an audience, then this is an author. This is an author. Was that okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That's absolutely fine.
Good.
Thank you so much,
sir,
Prabhuji. Sorry, Rashi is saying.
There was another part of my question, that can we include our imaginations, that how we imagine Krishna and in our writings?
Imagination. There are some devotees that have written novels based on, discovering Krishna in their lives. It's a fiction imagination. Imagination, we have to be a little careful with that, because if you write a book and you send it to me and you're imagining Radha and Krishna going to Disneyland, for example, and this is a book you're taking very seriously, and I'm reading about how Radha and Krishna are going to Disneyland. I mean, what am I supposed to do with that, right? Okay, so the point is that imagination, it's funny, because imagination actually is very powerful, and it can be extremely powerful in writing. Again, if it proceeds from reality in a way that can be meaningfully expressive of reality. Imagination always returns the reader to something archetypal in reality. So, you get the J.K., was that her name? J.K. Rowling, whatever, and that were, C.S. Lewis books, or these children's books. They're fictitious, but they are communicating something powerfully archetypal. Bad, the fight against evil, darkness and light, the struggle between those two, the parental imagos, and struggles with that, with the child. All kinds of archetypal themes can be presented powerfully in imaginative, fictitious concepts. But we are incapable of absolute fiction. There's nothing that's absolutely fictitious. And at the same time, we're incapable of something that's absolutely true, because we're not absolutes. So somewhere in all of that, we have to bring a reader to the discovery of the absolute, and to inspire them to enter into a life that probes meaningfully the life of the heart, of loving Radha and Krishna's love, which can never be contained. It's boundless. Their love is boundless. So, yes, imagination can be used. But again, in its own way, it has to be used in a true way. Okay? It has to be used in a true way. If you're a Rasika that is so advanced that you can imagine Radha and Krishna, at a well together, and a little spat between them, and so on. That's a little later in our spiritual evolution. We have to be very careful with that sort of thing. And those things are only shared among the most intimate devotees, not masses. So imagination is fine. It is used. Yeah, it is utilized.
So thank you, Prabhuji, for an
Thank you for the answer.
amazing session today. I mean, we are really grateful for you to join us. Hopefully we can do this again with the School of Bhakti.
Sure.
And I mean, this is a perfect note to end with, you know, inspire them to discover the heart. This has been our theme throughout the entire project, the Bhagavatam project. So we hope that you can join us again and give us another session. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure, and I thank Jagadish Hari for initially sort of tipping me off to this group. In the future, I'd prefer not to be invited by him, but by someone else. That'd be great. For just personal reasons, that would be fine. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's fine. I would enjoy coming back here. This is a lively group, and I'm happy to serve any of you any way I can.
Wonderful. So maybe we can give Prabhuji 3 Haribols again before we leave. Haribol, Haribol, Haribol. Thank you all for joining us, and I will see you tomorrow morning for another session, the Fantastic Four. Haribol.
Thank you.
Radhe Radhe.
Radhe Radhe.
Radhe Radhe.
Radhe Radhe.